Hey everybody, it's Meg from Books Off the Beaten Path. I'm trying to get the popcorn out of my teeth because it is time for a book review. It'll be an early evening, late afternoon book review. We'll call it a late afternoon book review. And it'll be a short one because it's a short book. Dr. Kildare, Assigned to Trouble. There's our charming Dr. Kildare right there. There's one of his other fellow doctors. There's young Tommy, and they're looking at the chart, and they're like, oh, this funny and everything like that. And there is Nurse Ross. Is that a HIPAA violation? Look there, there's their ambulance. Ooh, it goes fast. Okay, so let me give you the setup. Dr. Kildare is in the first parts of his residency, I think is what you call it, is when you go into the hospital and you actually start working as a doctor, but you're supervised as another doctor. My sweet hubby just came in and mooned me, which was not nice at all. See, now you have to get on the camera and say you're sorry. You know, he refuses to get on the camera. We're going out to eat here with friends in a little bit, and so he's a little playful. He's a little playful at the moment. Okay, now where was I? Oh yes, our charming Dr. Kildare. So Dr. Kildare, he is in his residency. He's in the first part of his residency, and he's busy, and he's seeing a lot of patients. He's got to study for exams. He's got to write notes. I'm telling you, he's busy. And Dr. Gillespie, and this must be an early one in the series because Dr. Gillespie is not yet in a wheelchair. I've read other books where Dr. Gillespie is in a wheelchair, but he's not in a wheelchair. He's the head of the hospital, and he's still quite gruff. And so he says, I'm going to assign you. Yeah, I know you got a lot to do. But there's this kid, Tommy Benton. And Tommy Benton's father was a very successful surgeon here at our hospital. And we have a whole wing named after him. He was also a missionary guy, and he made a big hospital in India and everything like that. And so his son, Tommy, wants to become a doctor. And so I want him to shadow you on every day and what you do. And he's going to live at the hospital with you because like the residents lived on the hospital, which I think they still do. I think they still do in some situations. They live there on the hospital grounds. Well, Dr. Kildare is not happy about this at all. He's not in the mood to babysit. And so he meets Tommy, and Tommy is just a snot. I mean, it's not like Tommy is, I have to be very careful the way I describe him, because it's not like Tommy talks back. He doesn't talk back. He doesn't talk at all. He barely pays attention when he goes into the rooms with Dr. Kildare and everything like that. He barely pays attention. And then when people ask him something, like they might say something to him like, oh, did you find that delivery of the baby interesting? He'll be like, yes. So Tommy's a little snot. And Dr. Kildare goes back to Dr. Gillespie, and he's like, he's a snot, and I don't have time for it. And Dr. Gillespie rears up, and he was like, a good doctor would know how to deal with a little teenage snot, which I think is a bit of a reach. It's a bit of a reach, but it's what he says. He's like, a good doctor would learn how to deal with it, and you're going to learn how to deal with it. So I don't want to hear anything about you're not going to take him around. You're going to take him around. So in the meantime, they're doing this disaster prep work because in case there's a disaster in the small town and everything like that, they want to bring out their ambulance and, you know, help with the disaster and everything like that. And we also have, in the meantime, we have a character, and I forget his name. We'll just call him Mr. Crawford. And this used to be Kelly Shepard's book. And Kelly Shepard obviously didn't like the nurse because she colored out her face. But look at the guy in the bed all covered in bandages. Mr. Crawford has, and again, that's not his name, I just don't want to look it up right now. He has been in a house fire, and his entire family has perished in a house fire. He's the only one left, and he has burns covering 90% of his body. And he is the only person that Tommy likes to talk to on the rounds and everything like that. And Mr. Carson, in typical vintage manner, by the end of the book, because at the beginning he's very depressed, and Dr. Gillespie reminds us so often, as Cherry Ames will remind us, that it's the mental attitude of the patient that causes the patient to heal faster. And so Dr. Gillespie's been very worried about Mr. Crawford because he's been very depressed for obvious reasons, but Tommy spends a lot of time with him, and Tommy actually gets him on the up and up, and Mr. Crawford and Tommy form this friendship, and it's really sweet, and it's really nice, and everything like that, and it was a really good part of the book. I really enjoyed that. Anyway, so Dr. Kildare has tried without success to break the ice with Tommy and to get him to kind of come out of his shell. And he keeps telling Tommy there's no shame in not wanting to be a doctor, because he thinks that Tommy doesn't want to be a doctor. Because why would he act like that if he wanted to be a doctor? And he thinks that Tommy doesn't want to be a doctor. And Tommy keeps insisting that he does want to be a doctor, and that Dr. Kildare just needs to stay out of his business. I mean, he basically tells him that, just stay out of my business. So in this weird sort of call me by your name moment, they go swimming at Dr. Kildare's house, and they're lying next to each other on the dock. And Tommy apologizes for being such a snot and confesses to Dr. Kildare that he held his father in such high esteem, because the father's dead. I don't know if I told you that. The father's dead. He held his father in such high esteem that he's worried about not being as good a doctor as the father. And so, of course, Dr. Kildare is like, well, you may not be. And Tommy's just horrified at that thought. And he gets mad at Dr. Kildare again. And he says, how can you say that when I'm spending, my summer doing this and everything like that, and all this kind of stuff. So they drive back from their call me by your name moment. They drive back. No sooner are they back at the hospital than the disaster drill goes off, and a dry cleaner in town has blown up. And so there are people with burns, there are people that have lost limbs, there's people with everything. And they talk about how their ambulance is a station wagon. And so they all load up in the station wagon, and they take Tommy with them, which I think is a little, I don't know that I would extend that to Tommy, but they take Tommy with them. And Tommy's out helping, he's 16, remember, and he's out helping bandage people up and, everything like that. And then at the end of the book, and I'm just going to tell you because you're never going to read it, at the end of the book, it's all good, as it usually is in vintage. Tommy's like, hey, I am really going to be the best doctor I can be, and if I'm not as good as my dad, it's okay. And Dr. Kildare goes sheepishly back to Dr. Gillespie and says, you were right. I was wrong. I did make it work. I was able to make it work. So that's Dr. Kildare assigned to trouble. And once again, I love the station wagon. They loaded the station wagon up, and they helped the burn victims at the dry cleaner and everything like that. And I gave it a 4.5 stars on Goodreads. It was a fast good read. I thought the hospital work was very interesting when they would go and visit the different wards and everything like that. Mr. Crawford was a little bit, that was a little Disney, and you really, just by talking to this young boy, he suddenly has this, new lease on life and everything like that. And I thought that kind of deflated the, authenticity of the book. Because I've read some Dr. Kildare's before where things do not work out as brilliantly. But everything worked out brilliantly in this one. Gave it a 4 stars. You know, you needed to believe in the good guys. At least I do this day and age. You need to believe there are good guys out there. And there are heroes like the heroes on the Potomac and the heroes in Philadelphia and everything. And we need to send up a little prayer or blessing or good energy or whatever you send up to the people that not only lost their lives, but also the people that are struggling through trying to do those recovery efforts, because it's not easy. And gosh, I didn't mean to end on a downer. But it's reality, and we all need to be aware of reality, don't we? So anyway, I am gonna start, I'm almost finished with reading the Shadows at Stormcliff Hall, and I'll have a review of that probably next week, and I will check you later.